Welcome to Wickerson Studios. I've tried to jazz up a tutorial that I found online on parametric generative design in Grasshopper. And that was this first series of building what it takes to generate. If you take a look at this example, the Chrysler Tower inside here, it gets pretty convoluted. So even though the initial test was a Chrysler Tower over top of a park and on top of another square building, I decided to, if you take a look at this, and I'll take this disable it, I decided to jazz it up enough with this series, and I'm going to try and make some sense of this. So this is how I think when it comes to a simple tutorial. I use the same solar, but what's happened here in my script is the blue is where I call it, Wickerson Jazz or custom jazz. So although the project started with a grid, similarly, I had extended that project through basically taking it into some rotations. So instead of a nice square Chrysler building facing up, you can go in here, and I'll show you there's some subtleties here that I can go in, just have the Chrysler building lean to or fall over a little bit. You see how it's just playing off of area centers on each side face, but when you take it up to 5, that building really jazzes and goes crazy. You'll see how that affects everything else. So that's kind of what I do when I take a look at basic script. And I try to make it a little more fun and add some basic grasshopper modeling or some flair to it in some capacity. This speeding up of the area, it's still going to be a project that we rely on metrics coming out. So the metrics are still being generated here, very similar to what they were. The problem is what I've done is some pretty cool projections on surfaces, which will, even though the data will be relative, it probably won't be exact, which would frustrate architects and engineers. But as an artist, I really don't mind at this point. Another thing I did was, you'll see here, instead of having a point on the ISO curve to get the sun to move and move around, I thought, well, this could be kind of space and galaxy-like. I should be able to move that circle anywhere I want, above and below. And I thought it would be better to use a multi-dimensional slider to start to produce those shapes. And you can see how the sun behaves in kind of an insane manner, up and down, but it builds some pretty cool geometries as we go. So I'm going to try and get a geometry that I kind of like. Hard to say, but that sun path really has an effect on what the shapes are in the end. And then I also jazzed up. I jumped in here and I thought, well, for the region intersections, it might be nice to go down. And what I did was I just generated a large polygon on the bottom that's much bigger than the sphere of what I wanted to kind of, what was I doing here? Produce the sphere. Oh, I wanted to project those up onto that sphere, so I'd have some interesting shapes. You can see those shapes as they come through, and you can grab the one and you can grab the other. I think that's it. Might give me a second. Yeah, I've got this model on here, which I want to take off temporarily. Visibility. Let's get that off. Let's go back to shaded so we can see what's going on. So not really much generated in those curves and these curves, but they're basically what's projected onto that sphere. And if you take that projection onto the sphere and then you re-project it back onto the plane, you get these pretty cool shapes. And they're all dependent upon the vector of how I choose to project that off in a direction. And you can kind of imagine that rotating on a sphere, even though it's two-dimensional, because I'm dealing with regions. But I like the fact that I got this interesting building like this, say. And so it's kind of a double projection, which I, just novelly figured out on my own. I did have to clean the data up for area values, which are really just number values. They won't be specific to the area because I'm blasting it onto a sphere and then projecting it back down flat. I'm interested to analyze that data afterwards, but I think what I'll do for the sliders is just call it kind of small, medium, and large, which is not really super engineered. And then what I did was I took it through an extrusion. There's one point that's an extrusion that you can see here. That's not so exciting what's happened here, but I've got it through a range so each building kind of comes up on its own. And looking at that final arrangement of buildings, I'm not so happy with how that one was projected back, and I was actually more excited with what was happening. Let me see if I can pull a pretty interesting building here. And it's kind of hit and miss with this, and I think it's basically back to the sun. So I'm going to leave it where I was playing with the buildings. And of course, I'm going to try and optimize the data here. The whole point is to take this model into something a little different. I thought that might be all right. But let me just grab everything. Needless to say, I think I've messed with my sun path long enough that my extrusions are there. It might be good to go back into the sun path and see if I can't just get my yeah, there we go. I started to get a pretty interesting building in there. Just playing with the multi-dimensional slider because basically it's dependent on sun, which is, you're building a geometry because of a sun path. Maybe not something you thought about before. I'm trying to take a look in here and see what we have, but it really is specific to what it does. That's an okay little building, so let's take that off. I think that's kind of cool, what was generated. And even though we're not taking it through an iteration, that's a pretty interesting little building if I was to take that 11 closed reps and take that to a bake. I'm not going to group it because I basically want to be able to go and say, hey, that's not a bad little building, but I could grab the main body of it and set it aside. We could leave this at this point, and then you see you have all these inner components of what kind of juts out and goes into this building. And these are the fragments that actually come about. And I think I wouldn't normally generate structures of buildings like this. And of course, form is not following function, which is something I build these first and then I kind of plan to change them around. So it's not too bad of an object, kind of fun to play with it that way. Those are all the bits and pieces. We send it back to where it was, assembled. And not a bad little structure. Let's put it back into here and throw that over to rendered. And you've got a nice new building. Excuse me, I'm getting good with the microphone and my sneezes. So that still has a chance to be what you need to make a generative model. It is a parametric model capable of taking multiple states. It has a way to calculate different states of the model, giving a metric, which is based on areas, even though the final areas and volumes are relying upon those base areas of the first sun path projections, but they change very drastically. But as long as you understand the sense of scale, I think I still could use it. Now I have to build the basic computational analysis browser, sort, filter this information in order to make this model generative. And that's where I'm going to really struggle. But I do like that this is a little more exciting, even though it takes a little while to have a look at it. This model itself is pretty exciting to think about it, that it came from a sample from the Chrysler building. So I hope you find that exciting. I do. And of course, the complexities of this with the blue areas is going to make, as I go through this, this will be my second sample. That will be my example of what I'm trying to do. And I'm going to throw that into a group. And I'm going to take this and save it, but I'm going to file save as. We're going to go back and we're going to do the second tutorial, which will get into creating those computational paths. And I think we'll be all right. And so as we learned a tutorial here, we're going to complex it and make something more interesting and variable here, because there's no reason to make architecture. You could be making jewelry, you could make sculpture, you could make design, whatever you think, furniture, whatever comes about. Simple little playful grasshopper things in my mind, but jazzing up someone else's tutorial to become something pretty cool and real. Thanks for watching.